Hey everyone, it's Dan with Dan Daily Finance. How you doing today? Um, Fascinating day in the market. So this is February 3rd of 2025. Um, just a really interesting past few days, regardless of what side of the aisle politically you're on. Um, so I just wanted to kind of cover what's going on. And actually, the big topic of today, not shockingly, would be tariffs and what they mean for you. So let's jump right on into this. Give me just 1 second here. Um, I need to be better prepared for this. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so screen share. Okay, you guys should be able to see my screen. So, I figured the best topic today for us to cover would be tariffs. So, first, kind of general market news. As you guys know, as you may know, on Saturday, uh, Donald Trump decided to apply tariffs to Mexico, Canada, and China. 25% for both Mexico and Canada, except for on oil products, oil exports coming from Canada. Those will be at a rate of 10%. Um, and then on China, 10%, I believe, across the board. So uh, initially, the market reaction was very volatile. We saw the Dow Jones drop over 600 points. All indices were down compared to what they ended Friday at. Uh, and that's not a surprise because not only did we see uh, tariffs get announced, we also saw retaliatory tariffs. So Canada said that they are going to apply tariffs on $155 billion of U.S. exports. They are particularly targeting Republican states because, in their mind, don't punish the blue states who didn't want Trump, punish the red states that did. Not a bad strategy if you're going to go into a trade war. Hit them where it hurts. Almost every province in Canada has decided that as of Tuesday they are going to stop selling. Uh, they're going to stop selling American alcohol. So I know that I believe Ottawa, um, British Columbia, a couple others. I think there's at least 4 provinces that have announced that they're going to do that. So, um, in addition to that, China has pledged to sue the United States in international courts. I don't know what that process is going to look like or how long it would take. Mexico originally said that they were proceeding with what they called Plan B, which they defined as basically applying tariffs to the US, but no details came out over the weekend. Today, the market recovered most of the losses that we saw in the morning because Mexico, the president of Mexico, had a conversation with Trump and agreed that she would send 10,000 of their own troops to the U.S. Mexico border in order to cut down on illegal fentanyl coming into the United States. That in and of itself is not a bad thing. You know what I mean? That's a good thing for the U.S. It might be expensive for Mexico. I assume it's expensive for Mexico, but that in and of itself is not an unreasonable, demand. Given that we do get fentanyl coming from across the border, so kudos on that. Uh, because of that, Trump had said that he will delay for a month any tariffs on Mexico. So we'll see where that, how that evolves as time goes on. Only time will tell. With that said, I guess the big question is, what are tariffs? So tariffs are a tax on imported goods. It's really that simple. So if you have a good that's $100 coming from Canada, and you apply a 25% tariff on it to get that good over here. So 125 bucks instead of 100. Now, there's this mistaken belief that tariffs somehow are paid by the country sending the goods over. That's just not true. It is a falsehood. There's no mechanism to charge these other countries this. In fact, the way that it works is the goods show up at our border, and the uh, purchaser of those goods has to then pay those taxes. Now, is it possible in some instances that the buyer of the goods could pressure the seller from the foreign country to maybe share in some of that hit? Yeah, it's possible, and some of that probably happens. Cases where substitution of goods or are readily available for reasonable prices. That's probably where it's going to happen the most, but it's not going to be the case with everything. In fact, it's probably not going to be the case with most things. Most, if not all, of the tax will go on American consumers, and the retaliatory tariffs announced by Canada will ultimately be applied to Canadian citizens because we're going to tax, or they're going to tax our goods as they come into their country. So, a real mess. I'm not a fan of this strategy. I'm really not. I think that uh, the problem with it is that it creates antagonism when it comes to other countries. So there's that I'm aware of, there are two major types of bargaining that are out there, or negotiation that are out there. One of them is distributive negotiation. The other one is integrative negotiation. And Donald Trump seems to be a big adherent to distributive bargaining or negotiation, although I don't think he knows what that means, to be honest with you, but it is what it is. The idea is that there must be a loser in negotiation. Somebody only wins if the other side loses because they get all the spoils or almost all the spoils, and the other party leaves unsatisfied. Uh, in a closed ecosystem with two parties where the goods are very important for one side versus the other, that strategy can work. However, on an international scale, where countries have plenty of other potential buyers and sellers that they can work with, integrative, uh, bargaining or negotiation makes a lot more sense, which is that you try and find ways that a situation can be mutually beneficial. And so we have this downside of this being a risky strategy in terms of the U.S. reputation abroad long term, the ability of the U.S. to trade internationally long term. Like, there's nothing that I'm aware of that would stop Canada, Mexico, China, and all the other countries that Trump has threatened, especially if he ropes in the European Union, like he had said that he will at some point, and by hitting them with tariffs. There's nothing stopping those other countries from getting together and saying, "Hey, why don't we just trade with each other instead?" Um, do I think there's a high risk of that happening? No, but it can happen, and there could be permanent losses. I'll give you a great example here. In fact, Boeing. So if you take a company like Boeing, or just take the commercial airline industry, there's different estimates here regarding market share. This AI thing says Boeing has a 40% global market share versus Airbus is 60. That seems a bit high to me. I know that there's some other companies out there and whatnot, but regardless, Boeing is one of the two major um, airplane, pictures that are out there. And Airbus happens to be located out of, well, it was founded in France. Its headquarters are in France, and they're the other big player. So, how do you destroy U.S. trade permanently? Well, if these other countries just say we're not going to buy any more Boeing aircraft, I'm just throwing out an example. We're just going to continue to deal with Airbus. Well, that's going to cause permanent damage to Boeing, which is going to lose. It's going to cause tens of thousands of jobs lost potentially. Its international business will shrivel up, and you'll end up with a situation where even if things revert back to normal, Boeing will have lost any I wouldn't say a competitive edge because Boeing has a few years. Let's be honest. But any foothold that it had on the international market could become drastically reduced. So now doubled by this development. And again, I'm not saying that's going to happen when it comes to Boeing, but I'm just, it was the first example that kind of popped in my head of this being a risk long term for America, especially if it's allowed to fester, which is why, for better or worse, the budging that Mexico did is a positive, and that's why the markets went from being down over 600 points at one point to being down right now 33 points. So they've recovered what 95% of their loss from earlier today. So we'll see what happens. Now, Canada's intent on following its strategy. We'll see what happens there. We'll see what happens in a month from now with Mexico, and what happens with China, and if Trump goes after the EU. And this could turn bad really fast. Now, this is not the first time that Trump applied tariffs. Trump applied selective tariffs in 2018. Joe Biden kept, I think, all of them in place. And I'm not going to sit here and say that tariffs are always bad. But you have to be careful how you use them. Just a broad brushstroke of 25% against everything is not a good strategy. But in 2018, when he imposed tariffs, it was against things like steel and stuff like that. It ultimately led to his own, I guess, renegotiation, the USMCA, which replaced NAFTA, which he is now bashing as the U.S. being taken advantage of, so I don't really get that. But, so it can work in moderation. In terms of, here, let me pull this up real quick for you guys. So this was something that I had found. This was from his original tariffs in 2018. Total goods covered, it was about almost 15% of all goods imported to the United States were covered by those special tariffs. The biggest item here, Chinese goods, which made up 10.4% at the time. But also we had things like washing machines, which there was a big increase in the price of washing machines during the Trump administration, steel, certain solar products, aluminum, things like that. So, here we get some more data, different contributions to our overall imports, and what that picture looked like. So, overwhelmingly, they covered, China first, but there was some exposure to Canada, Europe, Mexico, so on and so forth. But again, that is different from this time around. So I would be hesitant to say that it's going to look like it did last time, where it had some positive effects and some negative effects. The big question then is, what impact did those tariffs have on American consumers at the time? So, according to the U.S. International Trade Commission, back in 2021, Tariffs increased prices at the time by between 1.7% and 7.1% in the 10 most affected sectors. This included apparel, car parts, furniture, computer equipment. And then back at that time, or I'm sorry, last year, when Trump was proposing a 10% tariff on all U.S. imports and a 60% on Chinese goods, which he's now changed dramatically, the Yale Budget Lab estimated that consumer prices would rise by between 1.4% and 5.1%. Which doesn't sound like much. It's like a few extra percent. But for people who are already struggling because we've had years of inflation and we've had years of high interest rates aimed at combating inflation, plus we have a cost of living crisis and an education crisis, you're looking at a huge hit. And numerically, I guess the pecuniary impact of this could be between $1,900 and $7,600 per year. Now, some Americans, a lot of Americans, can absorb that. Most struggle with that. The vast majority, I forget what number it is. I think it's like, well, let me pull this up. Percent of Americans who can afford. So, yeah, I've seen estimates that have varied significantly. I actually don't know. I don't know if I believe some of these numbers, to be honest with you. This is the first time that I've seen JP Morgan saying that the number was between 77% and 92%. The number that I've heard is closer to the 37% of Americans who cannot afford a $400 emergency expense. So you are looking at a big chunk of the population that $400 can be a huge thing. So, we'll see again how things, kind of evolve from here. The next thing I'd like to show you, if this will load, this is a discussion of what items. This was written again before the whole tariffs paused situation. This looked at the impact that tariff would have on a variety of things. Food, for instance. Now, I know that just in general, about 60% of all fresh fruit and about 38% of all vegetables consumed in the United States are imported. So 15% of all food is imported. So last year, the U.S. imported $46 billion of agricultural products from Mexico. And that included $8.3 billion of fresh vegetables, $5.9 billion of beer, and $5 billion of distilled spirits. So you've got, a huge impact there. Fuel and energy. Canada is our largest importer of crude oil. So if you don't know, the U.S. Primarily, and it's been changing, but the U.S. primarily processes heavy crude, which a lot of it we get from Canada. They pump it through the pipelines, we get it, we use it. What we extract here in the United States is light crude. It's light sweet crude versus the crude, like the Western Canadian Select crude. And the reason why that has been the case is because a lot of these refineries were built at a time when fracking was kind of a pipe dream. Nobody thought that fracking would be economically viable on any large scale, and we had to prepare our refineries to handle heavier crude. Well, the fracking revolution occurred. We're now producing more oil than any country in the history of the world ever has. But it's expensive to change these refineries around. So we still export a lot of our own light crude. Um, Last year we imported $97 billion of oil and gas from Canada. So a 10% tariff on those is $9.7 billion that is going to cost uh, U.S. consumers. In fact, if you go back here to CNBC, you can see that while the market was down for the day, oil prices were up. They're not as high up as they were before, but they're still up. Natural gas is up over 10%, but we're looking at about a 0.5% increase for WTI crude, which is West Texas Intermediate crude. Car parts, cars, that's another big source. The U.S. imported $87 billion of motor vehicles and $64 billion of vehicle parts from Mexico last year. In fact, motor vehicles were the second largest good the U.S. imported from Canada last year as well, accounting for $34 billion. Now, it is worth pointing out that Canada seems to be moving in the direction of potentially 100% tax on Tesla vehicles, which I actually applaud because I think Elon Musk is a horrible person. And I think we should just start saying President Elon Musk and Vice President Donald Trump, to be honest with you. But it is what it is. Steel. We do produce a lot of our own steel, but we also import steel as well. We import beer and alcohol. We also export a lot of it, especially to Canada that buys, I think it's like tens of billions of dollars each year from us. Where it might not be that much. It's billions, as many billions of dollars. Another problem here, home prices had seen some weakness in recent years. I'm sorry, in recent months. Let's call it the past year or so, because there's been a decline in housing demand because of high interest rates aimed at combating inflation. However, 30% of the softwood lumber that the U.S. uses in home construction comes from Canada. That's not something we can just easily get here. We have our own lumber and all that, but they have a lot more. So that's going to be a problem for the home builders, which sucks because I own shares of Hovnanian Enterprises, which is, I think, a very cheap home building company that has a lot of upside potential, but it could hurt consumers in that regard too. Electronics, toys, and appliances, you get the idea. This is a big risk that the United States is taking that could have a massive financial impact on consumers. In fact, 99% of all shoes sold in the U.S. are imported, believe it or not. So we'll see what happens there. Now, before I get into the next item here, I don't know why I didn't provide a link there, but oh well. So I'll just delete that. There we go. So the fact of the matter is, if this tariff situation continues, we're looking at a big negative impact for everybody. The wealthy can afford it. The upper middle class can afford it. Everybody else is going to struggle. And the lowest estimate I have seen has been an impact to consumers of $830 per year for each household. However, I have seen estimates that number could be as high as $2,600, and I think that includes the impact of retaliatory tariffs and all that. So, people who voted for Trump for the sake of prices coming down, that may not happen unless we go into a bad recession, in which case we don't want that. We don't want prices to go down because of a recession. So There's also another impact here too, which is, the last couple of years have been a lot better for the farming industry because economic conditions have normalized. But during the first Trump tariffs, Trump ended up having to divert tens of billions of dollars to um, farmers. His tariffs, farm income dropped, uh, and since prior to that point, um, well, farmer suicides have always been high, but even now, farmers are 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. That's according to the National Rural Health Association. Um, there's a lot of stresses that go into farming, a lot of financial stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of work for very little pay. And uh, while bankruptcies have dropped the last couple of years, they were elevated because of broader economic conditions that included tariffs. So it's not just a financial cost that we're talking about. And it's not just them. People commit suicide every year. In 2023, 50,000 Americans, over 50,000, committed suicide, which is atrocious. And it's a sign of mental health problems in the United States. It's a sign that there's a stigma around mental health, but it's also a sign that economics ultimately play a role in all of this. So, um, obviously, if you're already budget constrained, drastically so, and this situation does get worse, you should get help. Reach out to somebody. National Suicide Hotline, a friend, a pastor, um, anybody. So I know these are trying times. I know these are difficult times, and it might get worse. But eventually, it's going to get better. Not going to be today, probably, but it's going to get better. So that's all I had for you guys today. Just wanted to share that with you. Just wanted to provide my thoughts on the tariff situation. I'd love to hear your feedback. If there's anything that you think I could improve upon or anything like that, please let me know. Please like um, my video, and also please check out my work. Other places I write for Seeking Alpha. I have over 33,000 followers there, where I write about all sorts of publicly traded companies. And in addition to that, check out my own fintech platform, Echo Investing. I have a team that has been dedicated to bringing this app to life, and that has the whole purpose of helping investors generate better returns in the market by being able to, I guess, benefit from the expertise of those who have demonstrable track records. So if that sounds interesting to you, echoinvesting.io is the web address. And that's all I got. Thank you so much, and have a great day.